and welcome to another edition of Connecting with Kim. We have a great show for you today here at Tampa Bay Arts and Education Network. You can also catch the audio of our show on Sun Radio 96.3 FM in Sun City Center or on your favorite streaming platform. So again, happy you're here with us today. I want to give a shout out to my sponsor, the Spring of Tampa Bay, for providing my on-air wardrobe. And if you want to know specifically which pieces came from my clothing, my jewelry that I wear, and this beautiful purse that I have at my side, you can go to the Connecting with Kim Instagram and Facebook page, and there I will have the post of the specific items, a description, etc. And then you can go to the Spring Boutique at the corner of Swann and Henderson, and you can get the items for yourself, and you'll be doing a good thing at the same time, because all net proceeds from the store sales go to support the mission of the Spring of Tampa Bay. And how fortuitous, because I have a first-timer in the chair today, and someone I'm just thrilled to have on my show. She's a legend, she's a community leader, she's doing great work everywhere she goes, and she happens to be the president and the CEO of the Spring of Tampa Bay, Ms. Mindy Murphy. Welcome, Mindy, to the show.
Thank you, Kim. I'm so delighted to be here, and so appreciative of your role in promoting our boutique on Swann and Henderson, because you're driving people over to visit, and that increases the money that we bring in to help survivors of domestic violence and their children. So it's a gift that keeps on giving, so thank you so much.
I love it, and I'm so thrilled that you agreed to be my sponsor, because there's nothing I like better than doing good. It's a win-win. Right. I get beautiful clothes to wear in the show.
And you look fabulous.
Thank you. And I get to help at the same time for something that I absolutely believe in. And I purposely did not describe the spring, because we're going to spend some time talking about it. But as anyone who watches my show knows, I always give my guests at the top of the hour, at the top of the show, several minutes they can take as long as they want to share with our listening and watching audience their life journey, because you just never know who's going to be listening and watching that's going to make a connection with something that someplace you've lived, someplace you've worked, someplace you've been, someplace job you've done in your past. So take it away.
Sure. And, you know, we're on the west coast of Florida, and so no big surprise, I'm a Midwesterner, right down the I-75 corridor. But my father worked for Procter & Gamble for most of my childhood. Procter & Gamble's world headquarters is in Cincinnati, Ohio. But when I was born and my sister was born, we were actually in Germany. So my dad was on assignment over in Germany, and we came back to the States after a few years. So I was a little thing when I came back to the United States. And we're in Kansas City for about 5 years. My dad ran the Folgers coffee division at that point for Procter, and then he got called into corporate headquarters. So we moved to Cincinnati when I was 8 years old, and that's kind of where, if you ask me where my hometown is, I'm usually going to say Cincinnati, Ohio, because I finished grade school, went through middle school and high school, and then played sports. I played soccer, I played softball, I was a swimmer, I coached swimming, ran track and cross country, did a lot of...
You are an athlete.
Right? So I was kind of decent at everything, pretty good swimmer, right? Because I actually managed to coach, and I played travel softball. So it was better. Those were my two probably greatest sports. But I threw the discus, made it to state or maybe regionals at one point for that. But, you know, did a lot of athletics, but also did a lot of clubs and things, and went off to the University of Virginia. So fell in love when my dad actually was the one who took me on my college tour trip. We flew up to the Northeast and kind of then wound our way down into Virginia, North Carolina, looking at schools, and just really fell in love with UVA. And so that's where I went for 4 years. And then after college, ended up here in Tampa. And have worked in the nonprofit sector all of my adult life. So started with the Child Abuse Council, so my background really is in children and families. I was a camp, I say once a camp kid, always a camp kid. So as a young person, I was very blessed to be able to go off to Minnesota to go to summer camp and sail and horseback ride and, you know, zip line and rock climb. And so I always loved working with kids. And so when I came down here, you know, got to work right away with the Child Abuse Council. It's now called Champions for Children. And I was director of development, so I was in charge of fundraising for the agency for about 8 years. Got involved as a community person as well, so ended up being the president of the Junior League of Tampa, which is a large women's organization, charitable organization. Actually did some stuff with the zoo and other child-focused charities, and worked for about 8 years until I had my son, and then was out of the workforce for 13 years. So that's the thing I would say to people listening. You can go out of the workforce and and then come back in. So out of the workforce for a little over a decade, but was doing charitable stuff as a volunteer.
Oh, I'm sure you were, yeah.
Yes, and then I got recruited back in. So recruited actually to become the CEO of the Spring, which was a little daunting. The first day they asked me, I said no. Because I thought,
I'm not ready for that.
Right. I was like, I've been out of the workforce for 13 years.
Exactly.
I'm not going to know what I'm doing.
Exactly.
So I said no, and then I went to sleep that night, and I popped up the next morning. I was like, this is your dream job, because it is not only helping children, but it's helping moms and women. And, we survivors can be men as well, and certainly we've provided services to men throughout our history. But, overwhelmingly, we're supporting women and children through the work that we do. And I thought, what a great marriage of my love of helping kids, but if you help a kid's mom, right, you change that child's life forever.
Absolutely.
And so I sheepishly called back and I said, I've changed my mind, I'd like to interview.
Can I still have the job?
Yeah, exactly. And about 2 weeks later I started. So so it's been great. It's been I started in 2012, so I've been there for just over a decade, celebrated 10 years in May.
Oh, congratulations.
And thank you. And we have such a wonderful group of people, and and I have so many interesting things that I've gotten to do as part of being the CEO of the Spring, and so many wonderful people I've met in the community. So it's really a gift for me. I get to make a difference every day. I get to work with an incredibly committed group of people who want to help keep women and kids and survivors of domestic violence safe. But I also have really incredible experiences and have gotten to know so much more about my community than I even knew before I stepped into this role. So.
Well, that's wonderful. We're both fellow Midwesterners.
Yes.
I'm from Indiana, which is right
Nice.
next door to Ohio, where where you spent your formative years.
Yep.
And my late husband and I had, his cousin lived in Cincinnati. And so we used to spend a lot of time. It's a great town. Love Cincinnati.
It really is.
So right there on the banks of the Ohio River. But anyway, so I thought we would start off. I always, in my intros to the show every week, I talk about the mission of the Spring of Tampa Bay, because I want people to know when they shop at the boutiques, the Thrift Store on North Willow, as well as the Spring Boutique, there's what they're supporting.
Right.
But I think we ought to, this is a perfect opportunity for us to start at the basic level, because there may be some people out there watching and listening. I don't know what the Spring of Tampa Bay does. So let's start there and build from there, talking about all the wonderful services, sanctuary, et cetera, that you provide for the survivors of domestic violence.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is interesting to me how many people shop at our stores and actually don't, they think that the Spring is only the store, or the, on Willow, or the store on Swann. And it's like, no, this is like our side gig, right? this
it's a good side gig,
it's a good side
gig.
It brings the stuff in, right? Because all of the stuff that comes in, the merchandise, first and foremost, if a survivor needs it, they get it, right? We sell the stuff that is and pour back in to our programs, the money that we make. But if a survivor needs it, they're going to get it first.
Sure.
So we have been around since 1977. Our mission is to prevent domestic violence, protect victims, and promote change in lives, families, and communities. And
now, you're one of the oldest, right? Have I got that right in 1977?
So 1977, we're among, we were at the early days of domestic violence movement. So the domestic violence movement really started in the early 1970s as an outgrowth of other rights movements, the civil rights movement, women's rights movement. And up until the 1970s, there were no safe sanctuaries for survivors of domestic violence. And frankly, until the 80s, there were no laws on the books that kept women safe within marriage. So, up until the 1980s in the United States, you could be raped by your husband. It is a thing. You can actually be raped in a marriage. Just because you're married doesn't give someone an absolute right. But there were no ways that you could, have the legal system hold someone accountable for abusive behavior. And so in the 70s is really when domestic violence programs started popping up around the United States. And ours is no different than the others that started in the early 70s. It was grassroots. There were 4 women, lived near each other in Hyde Park. one of them happened to know someone who was in incredible danger. Her husband was very abusive, and everyone was worried that he was going to kill her.
Right.
And so, kind of on a lark, one of the women who's still living reported, when I talked to her probably 8-9 years ago, she said, it was a little bit of a lark that they all said, well, we can hide her out, and in this one bedroom. One person had a spare bedroom. We'll hide her out, and the three of us will help you hide her. And so they did that, and then word quickly spread that there was this group of women, probably a little kooky at the time, right? That these women are going to hide you out if you're in trouble. And people started calling, and very quickly a grassroots movement was formed. And within about a year, we were incorporated, and we had an early Judge Castor, who was a sitting judge at the time. He got involved very early on. We had some pastors from churches who got involved very early on, a mix of women and men who said, we got to do something. These women are onto the right path. Let's help them. And so they rented a space, and then within about 2 years, someone donated the land that we're currently on. And so, we started, our roots were really to provide a safe sanctuary when home was no longer safe, a place you could flee to,
right.
and to staff a hotline, a crisis hotline that you could call, right, just so there would be someone who would listen and would believe you and would help you on the other end of the line. So that's the earliest roots, and then we very quickly grew from there. And so now we have a 128-bed emergency shelter. We have a 12-unit apartment complex where a survivor and her kids who've left the relationship, they can live for up to a year in safety. We have rapid rehousing programs where we can actually help with rental assistance for a survivor who successfully left a dangerous relationship and help get her back on her feet economically. We have a 9-person legal team. We have essentially a law firm within the Spring, 9 attorneys who work for us full-time who can provide free legal representation around injunctions for protection and child welfare dependency matters. We actually serve more people outside of shelter than we do inside. And so most people think, right, they think domestic
right.
violence, they think you've got to flee to a shelter.
Right.
The reality is you don't have to flee. If you've got a safe place to stay, if a family member can safely take you in or a friend, we can provide case management, connections to resources, a support group for you, all the legal and emotional and financial assistance you need, without you needing to come into shelter, which is a real blessing. We just added in the last year a camp. It's like my favorite thing ever.
I know.
It's called, Camp Hope America.
I know.
Right?
It's so amazing.
Yeah, so it's an evidence-based camping program. It started out in California, and there are affiliates all over the country. And so we are partnering with 4 other domestic violence centers in the Central Florida region. And we brought, last week, 52 kiddos came to camp. And
I know, I saw the Facebook post.
Yeah, and I was there for 14 hours one day. Actually, was there 2 different days, but helped send our kids off on the day that they left, and then went to camp twice. And it was just so fun because they got to be kids, but then there was also this the science of hope and resiliency is baked into the program, such that the researcher universities attached to it say that the going to camp for a week at Camp Hope America is the equivalent of about 4 to 5 months of therapeutic counseling. So the gains
that's
that
incredible.
Kids, it is. I mean, it's absolutely incredible.
I mean, that's an incredible
right.
statistic.
Yeah, and the kids, I mean, they were so cute. And my grown son, was one of the camp counselors. So it was just fun to
the wheel turns, right?
Yes, exactly, right. We all want to help out and give back. And we've also added a licensed mental health counseling component to our work. We know that survivors, just like the rest of us, struggle with mental health. Really no greater rates, but the general population has mental health challenges. Many people who are survivors don't have mental health. It's not because they were mentally unhealthy that they become victimized, right? There's somebody, an agent, a person who's doing that victimization. But just like the rest of us, sometimes survivors need mental health counseling, and so we have mental health counselors on staff now who have the lens of domestic violence, so they can both explore the regular challenges that you have just as part of life, as well as
this added layer.
Yes, that added layer, and how
which is complicated.
It is complicated, so
and it involves more than one person usually.
Yeah. And it's the difference, right? People forget that this is a distinct crime, distinctly different from just about anything else. The only thing I would liken it to is witness protection, right?
Right.
Where there is someone who is intending to do you harm, and you make the courageous decision to get out, that doesn't mean that the person intending you harm says, okay, well, I'm going to stop intending you harm. They are still actively trying to abuse you and batter you and victimize you, even when you've left the relationship. And that can occur for years after. And it is very different than other things that people experience. And I think that's important for people to understand.
Absolutely. If you're just joining me now, my guest on Connecting with Kim this week is Mindy Murphy, who is the president and CEO of the Spring of Tampa Bay, which provides sanctuary and services to survivors of domestic violence. And we have been talking about the facilities, the staff, the programs they offer, and now we're going to talk about other issues.
Sure.
So I was kind of curious about this. Did the pandemic was a major health, both physically and mentally, on our population.
Yeah.
So, and now people that were normally going other places, and children that were going to school and other places, were now not going to any of those places.
Right.
They were at home. So what happened at the Spring during that time?
So it was we continued to see our need for legal services rise. We served about 1,400 survivors last fiscal year with legal representations. Shelter was interesting because we had to decrease the number of available spaces in shelter because of social distancing challenges. But also, survivors would call and would be screened in for shelter, right? We've got a space for you, you and your kids can come. And then they would decide not to come because the fear of the abuser, who at least they kind of know what to expect in the way of being afraid, was outweighed by the fear of the pandemic, right? Especially in those early days. Like, I don't know if the pandemic's going to kill me if I go into a communal living environment where I'm going to come in contact with more people. I have some idea of what my abuser is capable of. Some, not always, right?
Right.
And so a lot of times people were very uncomfortable going into shelter. And so we were providing even more services via remote. So, you know, it's amazing. Social services is not known for being early adopters of technology.
No.
Ever. But it was shocking how quickly we acquired our professional Zoom licenses, and they're HIPAA compliant, and we deployed them, and we're still right now providing, remote services. So then one of the upsides of this awful pandemic has been that we have technology infrastructure. So now, even if a survivor could get themselves to, physically to a one-on-one with one of our, trained staff, if it's more convenient for them from a transportation standpoint, right, they have the option to meet with us over Zoom. They've always been able to talk to us on the phone. We have deployed chat.
Zoom is different.
Right, Zoom is different, but it's so nice, right? Because you do get the face-to-face, but in the safety of wherever it is you are, you don't have, an hour round trip to get there and back. You don't have to figure out what to do with your kiddos because maybe they're safe in, in their location. So, we saw that, but the escalating violence was enormous in the pandemic. And what we saw was really sadistic levels of violence, just incredibly dangerous situations because there weren't eyes on the survivor, right? If now the survivor's working from home, the abuser's working from home, and they're sitting like this, right across from each other.
And there's stress, the added stress of the whole situation.
Right. She has no escape valve. There's no getting out of his clutches. It sometimes was really hard even to place a call, right? Because he's ever present in her life. And the kids, are stuck there too, and the volatility of those situations. But because there's no eyes on her, she's not going to work. She's not taking the kids to, to the neighbors to play. The violence that could be perpetrated against her was increased exponentially in some instances. And we saw about a 20 to 22% increase in the use of weapons other than only hands and fists. So we were seeing, people picking up claw hammers from work or baseball bats, and just really, really intense levels of violence that have us concerned, and they're continuing.
So it's continuing.
It's continued, right? We haven't seen that decline. I haven't talked to them in the last month or so to see, but it continued. It's been holding steady for the last 2 to 3 years now.
That's disturbing.
Is.
Disturbing.
Yeah.
Because, and it kind of says, well, out of every
Right.
bad situation will always come some good
Right.
things, like
Yes.
the Zoom, like the
Right.
different ways we can connect, the use of technology.
Sure.
There will always be something good come from it. But this is concerning because the situation is not that the pandemic has gone away, not that
Right.
not that COVID's gone away, because it certainly hasn't.
Right.
But people are resuming normal activities. The kids are back in school. People are going to work again. But it's kind of like once you turn the corner.
Right.
That's what it made me.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
once you've turned the corner in that
Turn
behavior.
the spigot on, right? Yep. And yeah, it's hard to roll that back. And people were emboldened. People who
Sure, because they had
right.
anonymity and privacy,
Right. Yep.
right?
Yep. And same thing. There's a true correlation with men who abuse their partners also then abuse their kids. And
Yes.
so, right, that was also occurring to kids in the community. And yet the calls for a period of time to the abuse hotline were down, right, because kids weren't in school. And schools and, school personnel and law enforcement, I think, are the two biggest reporters of child abuse. And, right, so no eyes on the kids because they're not going to school. And so there were just a lot of people that were in danger and in crisis throughout the pandemic. And so it is good that things are opened back up in Florida. That is helpful. But I am concerned about the level of violence. And we're seeing that play out. I mean, just the mass shootings, about 50% of mass shooters have an identified domestic violence history. You drill back in and you find that. And it's probably higher than that. It's just, these are the ones.
These are the ones we know about, right?
Yeah.
That's concerning, and I'm sorry to hear that. But I understand logically the reasons
Sure.
why. But that's very, and I personally am glad that the kids are back in school.
Sure.
Because for many children, that was the only place
Right.
during their day that was going to be
Right.
safe for them.
Yep.
Where someone's going to pay attention and love them, and where someone was probably going to feed them.
Right.
So I mean,
Yeah.
shutting down the school presented major problems for children.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And school is, I talked to friends of mine who grew up in domestic violence situations, right? When I started at the Spring, I instantly became a safe person to disclose to. And I had friends I'd known for years who had never said a word. And then all of a sudden the floodgates open and they're explaining. And one of my friends, this will stick with me forever, she said, I slept, first period was math for most of my young years. And she said, I'm not very good at math today. She said, because math was the class period that I'd slept. It was my first class of the day, and I would sleep because I didn't sleep at night, because until they fled in the middle of the night from her abusive father when she was 10, she never saw him again. So mom packed up she and her brother and off they went. She said, school was the place where I could sleep, where I felt safe. And we are just now starting to recognize that and put things into place in schools to help schools be better equipped to deal with the trauma that kids are bringing every day into their schools. We've got to have a better handle on that. And there's a national group, it's evidence-based, it's called Handle with Care, and it's coming to Florida. I just heard the presentation yesterday, but it literally is a message that just is sent out. So, if Kim comes to school on Tuesday and we know, a system knows that on Monday night something traumatic happened, there's just a message that says, Handle with Care for Kim for the next 30 days. Doesn't give this teacher personnel you don't know anything about it because that's private and you don't need to know. You just know that Kim experienced something and we need to handle Kim with care for the next 30 days. And if Kim's sleeping in the classroom, instead of yelling at her and holding her accountable because she's misbehaving, we need to say, gosh, you maybe we can send you to the nurse and you can take a quick nap, right?
Right.
Handle with care for kids.
Well,
Yeah.
we're never going to grow healthy adults if we
No.
don't grow healthy children.
Exactly.
And and we all benefit from having healthy adults in this
Right.
society.
Yeah.
So anything that we can do, and we're not going to even address the issue of violence in the school,
Right.
shooters and whatnot.
No.
But anything we can do to help these children who are in
Sure.
very difficult situations, know
Feel
that there's a
safe. Yeah.
place where they can feel
Yeah.
safe and somebody's going to love them and take care of
Right.
them and provide basic
Sure.
necessities for them.
Right.
I'm all for that.
Yeah, because again, my work. So we say all the time, we can keep building more shelters, we can keep adding more programs, but we're just meeting the demand.
You're meeting the symptoms.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've got to go upstream and do the prevention work. And we have a prevention team, but we've got 2 people trying to do prevention in Hillsborough County, right? We probably need 100 people doing that work. But 2 people is better than 0 people. But the reality is we have to intervene and help the kids not repeat, right, the generational.
Right, because that's what happens.
Right, because that's what happens. And so
we know that.
yeah,
Statistically,
right.
we know that.
And one organization can't do that,
No.
right? That is a community saying we've got to do better for our kids. We've got to intervene now for the folks who are being victimized, but we've got to then go upstream and help the kids not become, right, the next generation that is perpetrating or being victimized.
So we're getting close to our time. So I want to ask you, since you came in 2012 to the spring, what is the greatest lesson that you've taken away from your time there?
I mean, honestly, my background was child welfare, not domestic violence, and I think it is the epidemic, and it is named, domestic violence is an epidemic in the world. It's named so by all of the big system thinkers in our country and around in other countries. So this is everywhere. I think that people don't realize that domestic violence is happening in their neighborhoods. I don't care where, your level of wealth, I don't care your race, your ethnicity, it is happening everywhere. It's an epidemic. And if you want to help someone, you have to make yourself a safe person. And so I think my biggest takeaway is that we all have the ability, even if whether we work in this field or not, we each have the ability to make ourselves a safe person. And the way we do that is we talk about this. We acknowledge, especially when things happen, Ray Rice years ago, Gabby Petito was a big issue last year. There are moments in the media that occur, and if you choose to talk with your friends about it, you are letting them know that this concerns you, and you're making it more likely that if one of your friends is a survivor of domestic violence, is experiencing it right now, and you have no idea, that you might be the person that she comes to and shares what's going on. And if she does, then there's a couple things you need to do. You need to not minimize what she tells you.
Right.
Right? Because this is one of the best books. If you read only one book about domestic violence, No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder, is a fantastic book about domestic violence, written in a very engaging way, so you don't have to work in this field. But one of the things she says is abusers, right? She thought abusers would appear as monsters. She said, but they're charming and engaging, and they're just like the neighbor you love next door.
Well, look at Ted Bundy.
Yes,
right?
exactly. And so when somebody does disclose to you, don't say, oh gosh, he seems like such a nice guy. Maybe you're overreacting. I bet you he didn't mean that. Believe her and tell her, don't try and change her. Don't tell her you got to leave him right now, right? Just give her space to make her own decisions, because abuse is about power and control, and abusers strip away a person's agency, a person's ability to make decisions about their life. You don't want to be the friend who does that too.
Right.
So you say, I am sorry, this should not happen to you. There's nothing that you do that should cause somebody else to do what you're describing to you. I am here for you. If you need resources, I can connect you to those resources. The Spring at Tampa Bay, CASA over in Pinellas, Sunrise over in Pasco County. I can connect you. I am here. If you need a safe place to flee, you can come to my house and I will problem solve with you for long-term what's safe. Make yourself a safe person, because you never know who in your circle might be experiencing domestic violence, and they're not willing to tell you because they're not sure they can trust you.
Exactly. Well, on that note, we are going to have to leave this. We could talk all day about this.
We could, yeah.
I want to thank you for being my guest today, Mindy,
Sure.
on Connecting with Kim. I've had Mindy Murphy, the president and CEO of the Spring of Tampa Bay, which provides sanctuary and services for victims and survivors of domestic violence. And I also want to thank them for being my sponsor for my on-air wardrobe on Connecting with Kim. You can find the items at the Spring Boutique, which is at the corner of Swann and Henderson here in Tampa. That's all we have time for today. Thank you for joining us here on Connecting with Kim. Come back next week when we'll have another great episode to watch. Thank you. Take care. Be safe.